Hello dear viewers, here is a new video that I will please you on my channel Manhwa Compilation. I hope you like my story and how I told it to you. It was the 15th year after the disaster. People sat sadly in a place that had once been a magnificent city, the existence of which was now reminded only by the presence of a few survivors. The townspeople were in no hurry. Time seemed to stand still for them, dividing their lives into before and after. The man looked at his interlocutor with a gloomy look. The news that he had to present was far from joyful. He told the guy standing next to him that this time they decided to expel his sister. Hearing this, the young man, whose name was Francis Crofton, literally changed his face, refusing to believe in such nonsense. He mechanically asked his friend to repeat it again, hoping in his heart that he might have misspoke or confused him with someone else. Francis grabbed the man by the collar as if he were guilty of something. He only apologized guiltily in response, but what could he do? It is customary that exiles are always chosen by vote. The elite of this city looked at things purely from a pragmatic point of view. The girl standing next to the boss explained, without a hint of sympathy, that Francis's sister was of no value. Not only does she have tuberculosis, but she also doesn't know how to do anything useful, so there's no point in wasting already limited resources on her. At that moment, Francis wanted to destroy them all. All these majors who imagined themselves to be the masters of life, but in essence are absolutely useless people. But what could he do alone against the system? And is there any point in proving something when he will not be heard anyway? The guy did not explain anything. His look full of hatred was more eloquent than any words, and his hand automatically reached for the sword. Francis pointed the tip of the blade directly at the major, although he tried to control himself. The boss could not tolerate such insolence on the part of an ordinary citizen. How dare this scum even think such a thing? No one in this city dares to raise a hand against the boss. The main character silently glared at his offender. The time will come, and he will pay him for everything. The crowd quietly watched what was happening. Even if they were on Francis's side, they didn't show it. After all, none of them wanted to be in his sister's place. The conflict ended before it even began. The crowd slowly began to disperse. The main character grabbed his comrade by the sleeve, looking pleadingly into his eyes. The guy understood that since justice couldn't be achieved here, he could at least find out where they left Laura. The man said in a low voice that the girl was in the mountains. The boss, enjoying his superiority, brazenly laughed in the back of the leaving loser. The major's henchmen also found this situation funny. Francis hasn't done anything yet, but, in any case, he won't leave it like that. The main character went in search of Laura, listening intently to the silence, broken only by the rustling of the trees. He tried to shout to the girl, knowing for sure that she must be somewhere nearby, but no one responded. Hiding in the bushes, the poor thing was crying quietly, covering her mouth with her hands. She mentally asked her brother for forgiveness, not wanting to burden him further. Laura not only believed, she knew that Francis was strong and could handle everything, only without her. Suddenly, near the place where the unfortunate girl was hiding, someone's steps were heard. Laura curled up into a ball in surprise, trying not to breathe. Someone's feet stopped next to her. It was Francis. He finally figured her out. Laughing, the young man reminded her that he always won when playing hide-and-seek with her. Laura looked at her brother silently. To tell the truth, she was still glad that he found her. The girl cried bitterly because of the current situation. The world is already unfair, and here is also such a burden for my brother. Laura looked at her brother without stopping, as if trying to remember every feature of his face. Mentally, she had already said goodbye to him. At that moment, a terrible wheezing sound was heard above them. A huge zombie, taking advantage of the moment, quietly crept up to its victims. He was ready to tear them into pieces in order to satisfy his hunger at least for a while. With the last of her strength, Laura pushed her brother aside. Poor Laura finally decided to do at least something for her brother. Realizing that she would soon die anyway, the girl decided to sacrifice herself to the hungry monster. From the horror he saw, Francis froze in place. Tears flowed down his cheeks. His sister was his only close person. For her sake, he was ready to risk his own life. The zombie tried to attack, but fortunately the main character had a sword in his hands. The young man tried not to let the monster get close to him. If this monster inflicts even a scratch, the guy is finished. On the other hand, Francis was unbearably sad about what had just happened to his sister. The monster's blows were so powerful that even the blade of the sword could not withstand it. A crack formed on it. If Francis is left without a weapon, he will not survive. We urgently need to come up with something, just not to fall into the hands of the monster. It was clear that the zombie was hungry, the main character tiredly leaned against a tree, as if there was a stone on his soul. The young man considered himself terrible, and could not forgive himself for using the attachment system too late. There was still a monster next to him, but Francis didn't care much anymore. Come what may, he is still left alone now. The zombie was in no hurry to attack the young man sitting next to him. At the moment, he was eating a piece of flesh torn from the body of a person dear to the main character. Francis's soul was extremely miserable. He had just lost his last soulmate. Only loneliness and hopelessness awaited him. Francis was in a state of stupor. It seemed like someone was calling his name. The guy wasn't sure. Maybe he just wanted it. He didn't remember how much time had passed or what happened to him. It seems that the main character was back at school. One of my classmates reminded me that there was a lesson going on. This guy's face is familiar, but at the same time, something didn't add up. Francis took a closer look. He remembered who this guy is. It's Cody Gumple. But how is this possible? Cody died at the very beginning of the apocalypse. The main character tried to match the puzzle in his head, but the picture did not add up. The young man did not understand whether he had returned to the past, or whether the future had not yet arrived. Perhaps this is his brain's way of trying to get rid of painful memories. Meanwhile, the teacher calmly said that quotas for a special zone are very valuable. Only awakeners or citizens under 30 years of age can receive these quotas. Without a quota, the road to the special zone is closed. Francis looked absent-mindedly at the teacher, trying to understand the essence of what was happening. The young man tried to restore order in his head. The teacher talks about a special zone. In other words, we are talking about shelters. It turns out that Francis really went back in time. The main character quickly opened the desired page. In front of him was a system notice regarding the attachment reward system. He was strongly advised to start forming attachments. Now Francis has remembered everything. In his past life, he was unable to send family members to shelter. His mother died in the first wave. Then he lost his sister. The guy promised himself that this time, he would definitely make it into the quota. At the very beginning of the end of the world, Justin Clifford had an advantage. A group of subordinates. The main character and his sister had to join them, otherwise there was no way to survive. But this cruel egoist treated Francis and Laura like slaves. The scoundrel beat them and persecuted them for any little thing, until one day the one whom everyone called the Awakener came. Then the main character saw their strength for the first time. Those who were weaker could not stand it and went to another world. Only the strong survived, and Francis was one of those who was destined to remain in this cruel reality full of evil. The main character decided that this time he would save her. He would not let his sister die. Laura must survive with him, otherwise this world does not deserve to exist. Among the all-consuming evil, this fragile girl was his only ray of hope. Justin Clifford owned his own lending company. The glass walls of this huge building attracted the eyes of everyone who passed by it. This financial giant was ready to accept into its arms anyone who dreamed of financial stability, but to accept only for one single purpose: to subsequently squeeze all the juice out of naive clients. The office had its own morals, but for them, it was in the order of things. Business etiquette and communication culture are not about people like Justin's circle. Like the boss, so are the employees. One of the scum got what he deserved. Although the damage he received will have little effect on his future life, he has not done anything good with his own hands in his entire life. Justin noted the girl's explosive nature, trying to keep her from further, in his opinion, rash actions. For some unknown reason, the young lady was dressed very provocatively, and it is not surprising that she ran into trouble. The boss tried to somehow rein in the uncontrollable young lady. He had long-standing scores with her father, who left the family at the most inopportune moment, and left them with an unsettled debt. The girl had only her mother left, but she also chose to hide, leaving her daughter alone with her problems. Therefore, Justin reasoned from his bell tower, advising the debtor to sell her body and be more accommodating. Otherwise, she would not be able to pay off her debts. When the scoundrel ran out of words, which was meager due to his origin, he switched to assault and did not care that there was a fragile girl in front of him. The boss took advantage of the opportunity, being sure that there was no one else to stand up for the poor thing. The girl fiercely hated this creature in human form, but what could she do if fate decreed it so? The bastard threw the girl to the floor, roughly crushing her with his foot. But even being in such an unsightly situation, she did not give up. If her father owes the bandits money, then let them ask him. At that moment there was a roar. Someone brazenly broke into the office, opening the door with his foot. A determined Francis appeared on the threshold. From surprise, the bandits froze in place. Justin's foot continued to be on the back of the unfortunate debtor's head. Goggle-eyed at the uninvited guest, the boss rudely asked who he was and why he had come. Francis thought for a moment about how best to answer them. After thinking for a second, Francis called himself a superhero. There were still memories from the past, and a thirst to get even with them for everything. And he will do it. These scum will answer in full for everything. Justin was furious at such a daring statement, ordering his henchmen to immediately put the presumptuous daredevil in his place. The main character stood with his bat at the ready, not even thinking about running away and not caring that he was alone against three. His future and his sister's future were at stake. The young man did not wait for them to strike first, but immediately hit one of the bandits in the jaw with his baton. The blow cost the scoundrel a couple of teeth. Today was clearly not his day. Having neutralized the villains, the main character set to work on their boss. Justin's impudence and self-confidence gave way to fear and confusion. As soon as the guest's strong hand closed around his neck, realizing that you still need to somehow negotiate with this superhero, the main bandit, hesitatingly, asked the guy why he was doing this. Francis explained that he had only come to collect debts. Looking straight into the eyes of the scoundrel, the young man added that he and his friends are an obstacle in his path, and are pretty much spoiling another timeline. Francis understood that such a statement would be too complex for the bandit's meager mind, but he only answered the question put to him. Justin was horrified by what he heard, as if a ghost was standing in front of him. He was terribly frightened by the strange statements of the guest, because who knows what will come into this guy's head next moment. A second later, the bandit became hysterical. He demanded to explain to him what all this meant and who the visitor really was. For the first time ever, Justin felt helpless. He was no longer in control of the situation, and his guys were lying on the floor unconscious. After hitting himself with a bat a couple of times, the guy threw the bandit to the floor in the company of his friend. The conversation with the scoundrel was not yet over, but the main character had more important things to do. Francis approached the half-conscious girl sitting and tactfully asked if she was okay. The young lady was half lying, helplessly leaning against the wall. Her whole body was aching, and her soul was not easy. Opening her eyes slightly, the poor thing asked who he was. The young man didn't even know how to explain to her who he was. He looked at this fragile creature with tenderness, as if there was something in her that was painfully dear to him. Cleverly dodging the question, the main character again switched to the boss of the bandits. There is one more unfinished business left. The scoundrel, who had been sitting quietly on the side all this time, tensed again in anticipation. This guest had already made it clear that he was not to be trifled with. Francis again slowly approached the frightened bandit. Justin could no longer imagine what else might come to mind for this madman. The guy still had a bat in his hands, the power of which the boss had fully tested on himself. At the moment, the main character was interested in one important question. Where is the promissory note? Justin decided to play dumb, pretending that he didn't understand what he was talking about. Francis has not yet attempted physical violence, giving the scoundrel the opportunity to comprehend the seriousness of the situation. The main character was amused by how the bandit tried in vain to keep his imaginary earnings in his hands. Smiling, Francis suggested that the boss once again strain his memory about the receipt. Justin, sobbing, pointed to an envelope neatly folded on the table. In any case, he won't be able to earn an income with the help of a girl, and he wouldn't want to feel the strong touch of a bat again. In addition to the envelope, there was a sword on the table. Francis quickly glanced at what was written on the sheet. The contents of the note surprised him a little. The sword also did not go unnoticed by the main character. Such a high-quality blade will be useful to him himself. Francis handed the note to the debtor, assuring that now she certainly didn't owe anyone anything. The girl was still sitting in the same place, not daring to leave the bandit's office. Having glanced over the contents of the letter, the girl froze with indignation. It turns out that she initially did not owe them anything. The note was mercilessly torn, like all her non-existent obligations. A system notification appeared before the eyes of the main character, informing him that it was now possible to create an attachment with Kaylin Arnold. But the system also reminded that Kaylin Arnold had not awakened, so she could not gain the skill. Therefore, the first thing Frances had to do was help the girl awaken her skill. The time for revenge has come. The main character handed the girl a sword, wondering what her plans were. Kaylin was silent. So many unpleasant events had happened in her life recently that the thought of any far-reaching plans did not even enter her head. The girl looked in amazement at the blade extended to her, not knowing how to react. The first thought was that with the help of such a sword she would now finally be able to protect herself, and plans were already a secondary task, although not unimportant. Already outside the building, Francis felt raindrops on himself. He put out his palm, onto which black drops immediately fell. What is this strange atmospheric phenomenon? Black rain fell from the sky. This has never happened before. No one knew what caused such an incomprehensible miracle of nature. This is what one of the omens of the coming end of the world looked like. A system notification notified that Kaylin Arnold's rank A ability, metal manipulation, had awakened. This fragile girl turned out to be not as simple as she seemed. As for Francis himself, he gained the ability S-Class Metal Detection. In this system, there were levels of ability from lowest to highest, classified as E, D, C, B, A, S, SS, SSS. Abilities relate to the 6 basic senses. What is above the S level is basically dual feelings superimposed on each other. The strength levels from weak to strong are storm level, flood level, fire, tsunami, natural disaster, and indestructible level. The power level was based on the destructive power of the awakened one, provided his powers were properly developed. Francis had to either accept the abilities or refuse them, and of course, he decides to accept. The S-level ability is really powerful, and once the main character awakened, his strength approached the peak of the storm level. At such moments, Francis felt omnipotent, capable of even moving mountains if he had the chance, especially realizing for what purpose he returned to this world. While the young man was exercising his strength, testing his abilities, Kaylin quietly approached him. The girl saw everything. She was not so much stunned as surprised. Her main question at that moment was why Francis had the same abilities as her. Kaylin clutched the dagger in her hand, feeling her unity with this sharpened piece of metal, which at the right moment would become her assistant and salvation. The guy didn't know how to explain it to her correctly. Everything was simple and difficult at the same time. They are the same in spirit, united in their purpose. It wasn't easy for Kaylin to take things right. Perhaps over time she will understand and realize everything. Now all that was needed was to know that they were on the same side. Francis could not tell the girl the whole truth, and she is not ready for this. What is happening now is due to the many rewards he has received due to the attachment system. Every step he took now was premeditated and calculated for the long term. Sometime later, while walking around the city, Francis and Kaylin needed to find a place to hide. Such a shelter was found, but there was only room for one. The employee who accompanied the young people immediately determined that they both had developed abilities and unlimited prospects. The man suggested they enlist in the military, assuring them that this would be the best decision for them. Francis, out of politeness, promised to think about it. But the problem was that, at the beginning of the end of the world, the main character needs to bin more powerful people to himself, so he has no chance of getting into the army. At that moment, the black rain began to fall again. The employee accompanying the young people refused to take this natural phenomenon for granted. For him, it all seemed strange, just like the rest of the world around. Taking a break from the precipitation, the man reminded that the quota for entry into the special zone is very valuable, and they need to discuss a lot with their family. Without hesitation, Kaylin decided to give her quota to Francis. The girl was sure that she did not need such privileges. Moreover, she was motivated by a feeling of gratitude. The employee, having heard this, immediately intervened in the conversation, reminding that this is a very valuable place that cannot be bought even for $1 billion. But Francis and Kaylin seemed to be in their own little world. Kaylin suggested. Francis immediately agreed. The employee couldn't understand how someone could be so frivolous. Because of such young people, the illusion was created that precious places on the military base had sunk into oblivion, At that moment, a scream was heard. A man was screaming as if something terrible had happened. A crowd of strange creatures that were once people was approaching the guys. Now they looked creepy. Every single one of them was crippled and had a strange expression on their faces. The man who had been screaming before ran as fast as he could, begging for help. Kaylin froze in a daze. The fact that these strange people were biting each other shocked her. It looks like the world has gone crazy. The crazy people, growling like animals, quickly approached the calmly standing people. Francis motioned for Kaylin to remain still, while the officer pulled out his weapon, ready to fire at the right moment. The frenzied group of creatures were unable to control themselves. The man who begged for help lay on the ground while the madman looked at him with the eyes of a hungry predator. Another moment, and the unfortunate victim will become his lunch. The guy in the uniform gave the final warning, ready to shoot at any moment. But the madmen did not hear him. They obeyed some incomprehensible instincts. Realizing that his words had no effect on the crowd of crazy people, the employee opened fire to kill. But it seems that even the bullets had no effect on the brutalized madmen. They continued to approach, ready to attack at any second and tear the unfortunate people to pieces. The first to fall into the clutches of zombies was an employee who did not believe in what was happening until the last moment. The zombie pressed him tightly to the ground, intending to eat him alive. Under the onslaught of the rabid creature, the pistol fell out of the employee's hands, and now he was becoming an easy prey for these strange animal people. Even the metal fence could not withstand the onslaught of the crazy power of these creatures. The monsters were driven by a feeling of hunger and rage, sweeping away everything in their path. Francis tried to compare everything that was happening, but something didn't add up. What was happening was illogical. The main character, remembering previous experience, volunteered to solve the problem. But the task was complicated by the fact that there were many crazed creatures. All hope was for a lightning-fast reaction and sleight of hand. Francis intended to stop the zombies with his bare hands. The calculation was based on their inhibition and lack of intelligence. In addition, the main character already had the necessary skills. The guy's calculation worked. The crazed creatures were neutralized, and his comrades were not harmed. Francis noticed that the zombies appeared even before the black rain ended. Everything happened earlier than he expected. At that moment the bell rang. Thank God the mobile connection was still working. The main character received a call from his mother. The woman was just about to warn him not to go outside. It was too dangerous there. But besides this, there was one more bad news. Francis's sister was kidnapped. The young man never expected such a turn, thinking that he had everything under control. The zombies, meanwhile, continued to attack, and there were more and more of them. Even serious damage throughout the body did not stop the crazed creatures. After hearing the news, Francis quickly took off and rushed home. In his past life, there was no such thing that his sister was kidnapped. The first explanation that came to his mind was the butterfly effect. This sometimes happens when you go back in time and try to change events. The young man could not allow anything to happen to his sister Laura. Something had to be done urgently. No matter what happened, the main character was determined to act radically. Even if he has to kill someone, it won't stop him. Francis destroyed the zombies one by one using his metal manipulation skill. The guy didn't even need to come into close contact with the monsters. They already had no chance of salvation. Kaylin noticed how strong and dexterous her friend was. Having the same abilities, the guy was much stronger than her. All she could do was not disturb him. After a few minutes, most of the zombies on their way were neutralized. Francis and Kaylin calmly left the site of the recent battle and moved towards the main character's house. Behind the young people remained the bodies of zombies strung on huge swords. The monsters will no longer be able to harm anyone. After some time, Francis and his guest were already on the threshold of his apartment. They were met by a pretty girl, who turned out to be the mother of the main character. The girl was very happy that at least everything was okay with her son. The young man tried to calm his mother down. Now he's here, which means everything should be fine. He will definitely bring his sister back. Francis was primarily interested in whether the kidnappers had left any messages. Now, the most important thing is to know what to start from and in which direction to search for Laura. Mom replied that the bandits told the guy to come to the Kevin Gibbs building. The grief-stricken mother could not calm down. Her daughter was in unknown hands, and she could not do anything about it. The woman wanted to know who they were and what the score was between them and her son. After all, the bandits threatened to kill Laura if Francis did not come to the specified address. The name of the company, Kevin Gibbs, was familiar to the main character, but the guy did not understand what it had to do with him and his family. Kaylin, who had been standing on the sidelines all this time, decided to intervene in the conversation, suggesting that Kevin Gibbs was the property of Justin Clifford. Francis did not yet understand what kind of relationship Justin Clifford could have with Kevin Gibbs. Kaylin explained that Kevin and Justin are half-brothers. The main character was confused, because he had never seen Kevin Gibbs in his past life. And until this moment, the young man was sure that Justin's half-brother had died at the beginning of the apocalypse. Now many plans had to be rethought on the fly. First of all, now it was necessary to take care of my mother. Francis asked the woman to pack her things. It was not safe to stay here, so he would take her to a shelter. Mom was very worried about Laura, but the young man assured that he would return her. Watching his mother absent-mindedly pack her things, the main character suddenly thought that he was relying too much on information from his past life. What happened to his family is also his fault. But he told himself that we should not forget about the cruelty of the end of the world. Feeling his mother's affectionate and caring gaze on himself, the young man carefully and leisurely helped her pack her things into a suitcase. The main character decided this. If he wants to protect his family, he must be more careful in the future. Now he needed to collect more information about his enemies. And someone will help him with this. Francis walked up to Kaylin and lightly put his arm around her shoulders. The main character, thinking for a moment, carefully asked the girl what she knew about Kevin Gibson. Kaylin was trying to figure out where to start. At the entrance to the shelter, the guests were met by a guard. This building belonged to the defense line of the special zone. The young people did not go inside, leaving their mother with the employee. So that the woman would not worry, Francis said that he had room for one more person, and as soon as he saved his sister, he would immediately send her here to keep her mother company. Mom was in no hurry to go inside. She didn't want to let her son go somewhere unknown, but the situation left her no choice. The only thing the woman could do was ask the young man to be more careful. Francis reassured his mother as best he could, since he was also awakened now. So he assured her that everything would be okay. Rain was falling from the sky again, and the main character asked his mother to quickly go inside so as not to get wet. The woman reluctantly agreed. She was still worried about her son. Military helicopters were flying over the city. The situation was getting a little out of control. This refuge remained the only quiet place where one could hide from the impending danger. Francis and Kaylin followed the woman with their eyes, making sure that she had still gone inside the building. The heroes moved on. On their way, every now and then they came across mutilated bodies. Kaylin still couldn't understand what kind of people had gone crazy and why black rain was dripping from the sky. But Francis didn't explain anything to her, citing the fact that he himself didn't know. Right in front of him, a zombie was tearing pieces of flesh from the victim he had killed. In his eyes, there was only a desire to kill in order to satisfy his exorbitant hunger. Looking at this terrible sight, the only thing the main character could say was that they all ended up in real hell. Distracted from its victim, the zombie attempted to attack people passing by, but was immediately stopped by the protagonist's sword. Francis's reaction was always lightning fast. Dealing with crazy monsters was not a problem for him. The more difficult task was to cope with the scoundrels who imagined themselves to be unpunished against the backdrop of the growing apocalypse. Francis felt his strength and energy increasing every time. All this gave him confidence in himself, and that he could now protect himself and those around him. The difficult thing was that the number of crazy monsters increased every hour. The young man understood that it was unlikely that everything would be as simple as it looked at the moment, and he would have to make considerable efforts to achieve his goal. The main character's thoughts were interrupted by a powerful explosion. Half the street was engulfed in flames. There was no one around. Perhaps someone threw a grenade from the top floor of the building. A minute later, everything became clear. A girl was running in the direction of Francis and Kaylin. There was a flame around her, but it did not consume her, but was simply nearby. The girl was rapidly approaching the young people as if she was being chased. It was clear that she was alarmed about something. The fire accompanied her, as if trying to protect her from something. Francis recognized her. It was her. One of the 10 strongest of the end of the world. The Queen of Flame, Shelley Erickson. Until this moment, the young man had only heard about her. But now he was lucky enough to see this fiery lady with his own eyes. She was so close. The fire resignedly obeyed her, as if it were a part of her. Not a single monster could withstand the onslaught of this powerful natural element. Shelley truly deserved the right to be called the Queen of Fire. Everyone who was lucky enough to meet her on their way admired her strength and indestructibility. Shelley often appeared accompanied by her two assistants, but they were not as brilliant compared to her. Francis recalled the first time he saw her in a past life. Then, his friend Brian told him about this unusual girl. At that moment, Brian was very surprised that Francis had not heard of this legend. He said that now there is an awakened person at the base of the level of a natural disaster. The main character looked at Shelley as if spellbound. He wondered how strong she was. Outwardly, she looked like an ordinary girl, like thousands. Brian was quite outraged by such doubts. He clearly stated that Shelley was the strongest elementalist. Shelley's every movement radiated confidence and strength. Nothing could stop this girl, and if she managed to control the fire, then other problems for her would only be a temporary obstacle. Francis did not doubt for a second that if he could get close to this fiery girl, then he himself would become very strong. Then, in a past life, Shelley Erickson simply passed by for supplies or completing a task, so the main character did not have the opportunity to communicate with her. Now that the Flame Queen was right in front of him, the young man was not going to miss his opportunity. Shelley was almost there. The young man could only start a conversation. Francis clutched the dagger in his hand tighter and prepared for the meeting. He was sure that he had chosen the right words. The girl should understand him. The main character stepped forward, holding a dagger in front of him. His question was whether she was ready to fight in this new hell. Kaylin, standing nearby, was shocked by her comrade's outburst. But perhaps he knows what he's doing. The zombies were rapidly approaching their place, but Shelley bravely resisted. The flame, burning, turned into clouds of smoke. Some monsters still managed to dodge the punishing elements. The fiery girl tirelessly directed streams of flame towards the enemy. The fire was everywhere, burning all the zombies that got close. Shelley stood in a circle of fire, strong and merciless to the enemy. The monsters, despite their lack of intelligence, did not dare to get too close. It is not known how long such armor could withstand, but the girl could use someone else's help. Despite the imminent death, several zombies still tried to get closer to their food. Their base instincts turned out to be stronger than common sense. Something had to be done urgently. Shelley understood that there were too many zombies, and her skill was not enough for the fire to act correctly. With every minute, the number of crazy creatures grew inexorably. It's not that her strength left her, but it was too little compared to the onslaught of crazy monsters. For a moment, the girl froze in confusion. At this moment, Francis came to Shelley's aid. The young man, without a shadow of fear, desperately rushed into battle with the hellish monsters. The girl was taken aback by surprise. His assistance came in handy. Shelley did not understand who this brave young man was and where he came from. The first contact between the two heroes was established. Now the most important task was to repel the attack of countless crowds of the fiends of hell, and Francis applied all his strength to this. Unlike the heat of the flame, which Shelley controlled, the young man's main skill was control over cold metal. Here, Francis had no equal. The daggers in his hands tirelessly struck the enemy on the spot. The zombies could not figure out which direction death would overtake them. The monsters had no chance of salvation. The icy energy of the blades overtook them from all sides. The main character called this technique the windmill. One of the zombies attempted to attack the young man from behind, but this did not go unnoticed. Francis was always on the alert. He felt every movement of the enemy. The monster pulled its predatory paws towards a potential victim. Despite the fact that this time he was not destined to satisfy his bestial hunger, his meager intellect flatly refused to accept this. Kaylin, who until that moment had been watching the battle of two desperate heroes with a crowd of raging monsters, decided that it was time for her to intervene. And despite the fact that the girl had little experience in managing her new skill, she felt enormous strength and a surge of energy. The danger did not frighten the girl. Moreover, she perceived this new world as something very interesting. Reality left Kaylin no choice. There were only two options, either die or fight. As the main character said, the time has come to kill. The time has come for Kaylin to enter this terrible game without the right to lose. The girl decided to cover her comrades if possible. Francis felt responsible to the girls, and his task was to go forward to the bitter end. This time, in this life, he will not lose those who are important to him. In addition to his skill, The young man smashed monsters outright with his own hand. Cold steel has never failed the young man, and now he will prove it to himself again. Kaylin fearlessly rushed into the thick of the monsters. The girl threw out all the anger and despair that had accumulated over these months on them. The street was filled with clouds of fire and smoke. Gradually the number of monsters decreased, and new ones had not yet appeared. A little more, and 3 fearless heroes will defeat the awakened evil. Gradually the smoke began to dissipate, leaving behind only heaps of useless bodies. The air was filled with the smell of burning and death. This was the reality in which young people had to live. Looking at the battlefield, the main character sighed with relief. It was finally all over. The guy admitted that he was a little tired of killing. Kaylin agreed with him. She felt the same. For the last few minutes of the battle with the monsters, Shelley silently watched Francis and Kaylin. These two seemed so strong to the girl that she concluded that they were both at the peak of the storm level. Kaylin tiredly squatted down, absent-mindedly looking around the street strewn with the bodies of monsters. The young man finally turned to Shelley and tactfully asked if she was okay. The Queen of the Flame automatically replied that everything was fine. The girl looked at Francis with admiration. The guy said his name and politely extended his hand for introduction. After shaking the hand of her new comrade, Shelley introduced herself too. The newly formed tandem promised to be quite successful, and perhaps even the strongest in the entire city. A system notification indicated that the linking capability had been reached, and the linking specifically to Shelley Erickson had been completed. On top of that, the main character received the S-Class Ignition Psychic ability as a reward for binding. While Shelley and Francis were getting to know each other, Kaylin found herself a new entertainment. She had never seen zombies so close, and now she had the opportunity not only to look at, but even to touch them without fear of being bitten. Looking at such strange fun, the young man grabbed his head. The young lady behaved like a child who may have had some kind of psychological trauma. Who knows what else this girl had to go through. Francis was distracted from the unusual sight by some strange tingling sensation in his palm. A rather strong energy vortex was felt around the hand with an accent right in the middle of the palm. The guy needed to find out something. Apologizing to the girls, he asked to wait for him for a couple of minutes. But apparently, Kaylin didn't even hear his words. Francis's instinct led him straight to a tall glass building. Without hesitation, the main character immediately headed inside. The sixth sense did not deceive the protagonist. He found himself inside the central office of the enterprise he needed. Along the walls, there were shelves with documentation, as well as a computer system unit. The young man took a deep breath, feeling an unprecedented surge of energy and strength. Now it remained to find out what exactly this visit promised him. The system notification offered the main character to accept the ability or refuse it. Without a moment's hesitation, Francis presses the accept button. The guy decided, without leaving his seat, to immediately test his abilities. All metal objects located inside the office soared into the air and swirled in an energy vortex. Francis easily controlled this whirlwind, feeling omnipotent. The new skill has been successfully tested. The young man had a sharp blade in his hand, which he handled professionally without the help of magical abilities. In this situation, the main character became practically invincible. Two incredible skills, ignition and metal control, implied hitherto unprecedented strength and dexterity. And woe to anyone who dares to stand in this guy's way. Having tested his new capabilities, the main character decided to use them together from now on. These two abilities are truly a perfect match. Based on this, I understood that in fact, it should already be at the level of a flood, especially if you understand that the early stage of a flood is simply an incredible system. Now fully proficient in the manipulation of metal, Francis tried to put a steel blade on his hand. The metal obeyed. After looking around and carefully examining the contents of the shelves, the guy decided to take some more things with him. He was especially attracted by one box that seemed ordinary at first glance. Kaylin, meanwhile, continued to entertain herself by carrying out some seemingly incomprehensible manipulations with the killed monsters. Shelley's curiosity turned out to be stronger than tact. She asked Kaylin what she was doing. The face of one of the zombies was painted according to the artist's fantasies. Probably, in a similar way, the girl struggled with the consequences of stress. Instead of answering the question, Kaylin asked if Shelley would like to do the same, but was refused. The childlike spontaneity of this young lady amused the Flame Queen. Even before they really met, the girls already got along with each other. Kaylin continued to play with the monster's body. The poor thing was practically deprived of her childhood, and this zombie replaced her with a doll, which she didn't really have. Shelley stood nearby, no longer surprised by anything. At some point, the Mistress of Fire decided to still ask where the young people were heading. It's dangerous in the city right now, and it would be wiser to stay at home. Kaylin again responded with a question when asked why Shelley didn't do the same. The Queen of Flame explained the reason for her stay in a dangerous place. It turns out that the girl became separated from her teammates, so she's not here of her own free will. Kaylin also decided to share their problem. She said that Francis's sister was kidnapped and they were going to find her and bring her home. Shelley felt sincerely sorry for these young people. The girl asked if there was any information about the kidnappers and where they took her sister. It was strange for Kaylin that a completely stranger was so imbued with sympathy for people she barely knew, and she said it quite directly. Shelley was offended to hear such words, because she really was a kind and sympathetic person. At that moment, Francis came up. The young man said that they were heading straight to Kevin Gibbs's mansion, and since Shelley came from the other side, perhaps she knows what is happening there. The girl didn't know how things were going in Kevin Gibbs's mansion, but she warned that the streets were full of these crazy people. There was real chaos going on in the city, so sensible people tried not to go anywhere. Francis was very upset by what he heard. He had no idea that everything was so bad. But be that as it may, he does not intend to change his plans. Without a moment's hesitation, Shelley expressed a desire to go with these young people. The girl understood that staying alone on the street was extremely dangerous. And besides, the three of us had a better chance of dealing with the bandits. The young man was confused, not knowing what to do correctly. His conscience did not allow him to leave Shelley alone, especially since he was so eager to get closer to her. On the other hand, he wouldn't want to put her in danger when they got to Kevin Gibbs's mansion. Noticing Francis' confusion, the Queen of Flame assured that she would not be a burden. She was also strong. But the main character did not even think about the weakness of this girl. In response, the young man agreed to accept help and thanked Shelley on behalf of his sister. The Flame Queen did not like such pleasantries, saying that she was simply doing her duty. Taking the words out of context, the protagonist immediately asked what Shelley meant by her debt. But the girl did not answer, joking that he had simply heard incorrectly. Francis reluctantly agreed, but such secrecy still alarmed the young man. Approaching Kaylin, the main character motioned for her to get up. More important things awaited them than playing with dolls with zombies lying on the asphalt. Francis handed the girl a gift, a box taken from the office. Kaylin didn't know how to react. The girl was not used to receiving gifts, especially from men. There was a set of lipsticks in the box. The young man decided to cheer up Kaylin's mood a little, since she couldn't always use the same monotonous color. The girl was slightly taken aback by surprise. She had never been given such gifts. However, Francis hurried. They need to go now. She will still have time to sort out the lipsticks. The main character moved forward, inviting the girls to follow him. Great things await them. They need to rescue their sister from captivity, and then save the world. By that time the sky had cleared a little, and Shelley suggested that since the strange black rain had stopped, the crazy people on the street should return to their previous normal lives. But Francis was not sure about this. The joyful people did not know that after the cessation of the black rain, the real beginning of the catalytic period of the end of the world began. The main character knew about this, relying on memories from a past life. The real hell is yet to come. The catalytic period was essentially the beginning of the true apocalypse. People were expected to encounter monsters much scarier and more dangerous than ordinary zombies. The order of monster levels began with the lowest, including the period of birth, growth, and maturity. The high level was characterized by a change in polarity and the formation of a real monster personality. For an awakened person, the levels looked different than for a monster, and in increasing strength included such superpowers as storm, flood, fire, tsunami, catastrophe, and indestructible. At this point, zombies were simply survivors of the catalytic period. These creatures were unable to evolve, and before the transition to another level of the apocalypse came, the main character needed to hurry. He must pull his sister out of the clutches of the bandits and take her to a shelter before the situation worsens. Soon the young people reached a huge, luxurious building, this time without incident. Francis suggested we go inside. It was suspiciously quiet inside, as if life had stopped here since the beginning of the end of the world. The building looked completely empty, and this was even more alarming. The young people moved carefully along the corridor, looking around cautiously. Francis tried to navigate the place, looking for clues about the location of objects. Unfortunately, this time his gut feeling told him nothing. Judging by Kaylin's behavior, it was her first time here too. One of the boxes seemed suspicious to the young man. He opened the box with his foot, but there was nothing there. It looks like no one has used these things for a long time. At some point, the young man thought that he had caught something. He automatically sat down, listening intently to the silence. But again it turned out to be a false alarm. Finally approaching the elevator, the main character asked Kaylin if she knew which floor Kevin Gibbs and the others were usually on. But the girl wasn't sure. The young man wondered what to do then. As a result, having no other choice but to go to the top floor first, Francis pressed button 12 in the elevator. His plan was to start from the top floor and gradually descend below, to check all subsequent floors. An unpleasant surprise awaited the young people on one of the floors. The young people were about to step into the elevator, but what appeared before their eyes made them numb with horror. In the elevator were just those whom Francis was so persistently looking for. These were the same bandits, Justin and his henchmen, but what they turned into left the guy no choice. The one who had once been Justin was now looking at Francis with a hungry gaze. Yesterday's enemy of the mafia boss was now ordinary food for him. Dripping with saliva, the bandit rushed to attack the young man. Sharp fangs protruded from the gaping mouth, ready at any moment to plunge into the flesh of a living person standing opposite. Francis did not expect such a turn of events, and now simply looked in confusion at the rabid monster, devoid of intelligence. The state of stupor lasted no more than a few seconds, and in the end, having come to his senses, the main character commanded the girls to immediately retreat back. There were only 3 monsters, and the young man intended to deal with them alone. Francis activated his fire control skill and prepared to strike at this crazy trio. What happened to the bandits was natural. They didn't deserve anything else. In order to quickly cope with the zombies and not get hurt, the young man still asked the girls to help him. He intended to attack from the front, and the girls had to cover him from behind. Kaylin didn't doubt herself for a second. Of course she would cover her comrade. The girl remembered that she herself had quite strong metal manipulation skills. For now, that was enough. The girl activated her skill and immediately directed a powerful energy flow in the direction of the zombies. Another moment and the edge of the metal was ready to pin the monsters to the wall. Steel blades, having pierced the monsters through and through, were supposed to stop them forever. Kaylin felt an incredible surge of energy and strength inside herself. She was sure that she could kill them all herself. Shelley was not going to stand idly by. Her help would not be superfluous. A powerful stream of flame engulfed the monsters' bodies, causing them to scream in pain. But they still stood on their feet. The Flame Queen was amazing in her fire control skills. Kaylin noted with admiration that Shelley was too hot for this world. In response, Shelley complimented her that her companion was no worse. Meanwhile, the zombies could not calm down. Kaylin noticed that even though the monsters were burned, they were still very strong. The girl tried her best to defend herself. The Queen of Flame got back to work. Fireballs flew straight to the target, burning through the monsters. The former bandits, and now just crazy zombies, held on with all their might. Once these people kept the entire city in fear, but now they only evoked a feeling of disgust, not deserving even basic sympathy. This is how the corporation of the once all-powerful Justin Clifford collapsed overnight. The main character watched with admiration how these 2 girls worked harmoniously, but still asked them to be careful. Most of the zombies had already been killed, but the few that remained were still dangerous. When Francis asked him to be more careful, Kaylin responded with her usual touch of humor, accusing her new friend of not understanding anything about the real aesthetics of murder. All of Kaylin's movements resembled the strokes of an artist's brush, as if she was trying to bring everything to perfection. Even in such a dangerous situation, the girl tried to find the aesthetics she mentioned in everything. The zombies got their due in full. Steel spears were pierced into their bodies. Their flesh was mercilessly burned in the flames of righteous fire. At this moment, the apocalypse came not for the people present in the building, but for the monsters who lingered there. The madmen were still trying to attack, but Kaylin did not leave them the slightest chance. Now she was the mistress of the situation. The fact that among the zombies there was a boss she hated charged her with even more energy. This was her long-awaited moment of retribution for all the humiliations that she had to endure. Watching this battle, the main character was forced to admit the superiority of the former debtor of the mafia boss he saved. The Flame Queen is still very young and does not have much experience in battles. Instead, Kaylin Arnold mostly fights. Francis understood that the reason for such an unprecedented surge of Kaylin's energy lay in the fact that she had just awakened, and she was still as perverted as she was in the protagonist's past life. When it seemed that the whole nightmare was over, more steps were heard. The heroes froze in tension. Is this really not all? The noise of approaching footsteps grew increasingly louder. Another crowd of crazy people ran in the direction of the heroes. New zombies with fresh strength were ready to attack them at any moment. The mission to save the protagonist's sister was again postponed for an unknown period. There was no time to fight, and besides, the young people were already tired from the previous battle. Francis invited the girls to get into the elevator first. Every opportunity had to be taken to avoid another battle with the maddened crowd. The girls didn't want to leave their friend alone with a pack of zombies, but there was no other choice. Perhaps they will be able to find the protagonist's sister, and then they will all leave the building together. Francis literally forced the girls into the elevator and pressed the button. The guy intended to use his superpower to quickly neutralize the monsters. He was confident that he could handle everything alone. When the elevator door closed, the main character turned to face the madmen approaching him and prepared to repel the attacks. In the previous battle, he did not give his all, so now he was full of strength. Francis closed his eyes for a moment, concentrated, and then released a powerful stream of energy towards the crazy crowd. In the space around the young man, steel blades were visualized, ready to strike anyone on the spot. Cold steel pierced the zombies one after another, but others took the place of the dead. There were too many monsters, and they looked even more aggressive than the previous ones. Having thrown out another stream of steel spears, the young man quickly headed to the elevator and pressed the button. He did not have the slightest desire to exterminate this endless crowd. Kaylin and Shelley did not dare to leave the floor without their friend. And now, finding themselves all together in a small but protected space, they were finally able to catch their breath. The Queen of Flame couldn't understand what was wrong with this world and why. When the rain stopped, there were more crazy people. Thinking, Shelley said that what she had to face was not at all what the Bureau had previously assumed. The girl did not understand how she could now get out of this situation. The Queen of Flame was interested in what Francis thought about this, whether this could be a trap set up by Kevin Gibbs. The young man had no answer to this question. Now he was more worried about something else, where his sister was. In the end, the protagonist's memories of his past life were completely different. Then, Justin Clifford did not have Kevin Gibbs as an ally, because he died at the very beginning of events. Francis warned the girls to hold on tight, the elevator will rise. During the ascent, it turned out that the fearless Queen of the Flame is afraid of the elevator. It seemed to the girl that the lift was moving too fast. The poor thing was trembling with fear. On the next floor, the situation was much worse. Half-eaten bodies lay on the floor, between which zombies wandered in search of fresh food. The zombies moved sluggishly along the corridors, stepping over the remains of food lying on the floor. In the absence of potential victims, the monsters showed no activity and did not try to leave the premises. Several monsters, sensing the smell of fresh food somewhere nearby, approached the elevator, waiting for it to open. There is nothing human left in these crazy creatures anymore. These creatures did not even have the remnants of intellect. They were guided only by instincts, the main of which was an inexplicable feeling of hunger and an irresistible desire to kill. Shelley was so afraid of closed spaces that she had a panic attack. The girl curled up into a ball, clutching the handrails. She heard some noise. Kaylin didn't understand how anyone could be afraid of the elevator. She even joked about the poor thing huddled in the corner that she was the only one making the noise here. But Shelley continued to insist on her opinion. She clearly heard some kind of blow. The dull, loud knock was repeated again. It felt like someone was jumping on the roof of the elevator. One of the crazy people tried to break through the elevator car to get to fresh food. In the end, the flimsy structure could not withstand the pressure, and the roof collapsed. A monster landed in front of the frightened people. He was tall and physically superior to his relatives. From surprise, the girls froze in a daze. Being in a cramped room with a huge monster was the worst nightmare that could happen. Francis was horrified by what appeared before his eyes. This was far from being an ordinary zombie. It was something else, much worse and much stronger. The monster was much larger than an ordinary zombie and somewhat resembled a bodybuilder. How to fight this and where its weak point is still unknown. The main character roughly guessed that this specimen was at a different level of development in the so-called growth period. The monster fixed its gaze on Francis and laughed loudly. The young man did not understand how it could happen that the zombies entered the growth period so early, and whether ordinary skills would be enough to defeat this monster. Since the monster made no attempt to attack, the young people decided that it would be wise to quickly leave the elevator. It was too narrow and now unsafe. The elevator door did not budge and had to be broken open. A few seconds later, the heroes found themselves on one of the floors. It was also dangerous here, but still better than in a cramped room in the company of an unknown monster. The monster was still inside the elevator. He was looking closely at the people, as if he was waiting for some moment he needed. In the light of day, this monster looked even more terrible, and sharp thorns grew from its back. The young people did not run away, realizing that such actions could provoke the monster to attack, but internally they were already prepared for this. The monster made a sharp jerk and attempted to leave the elevator car. Shelley activated the power of the flame and asked her comrades not to interfere. She was confident that she would be able to neutralize the monster with the power of her fire. The monster tried to reach its prey with a huge hand. The flames that enveloped everything around did not frighten him. The monster stubbornly moved towards its goal. The main character could not stay away, seeing that Shelley was in danger. The young man concentrated the energy into a ball and directed this powerful stream directly at the zombie's head. The monster was thrown back a couple of meters by the blast wave. Looking back at Shelley, the guy asked if she was okay. The girl was at a loss, but assured that everything was fine with her. Francis sometimes had the impression that she was not as strong as she once seemed. Kaylin was the complete opposite of her. This girl had enough courage and confidence for 10. And now this young lady decided that it was her turn to attack the super monster. The girl was about to strike the first blow when suddenly everyone's attention was attracted by a roar. Something landed from somewhere above. What happened caused an ambiguous reaction among the heroes. Kaylin was touched, calling what she saw a happy jump. Shelley, on the contrary, was perplexed because the person who committed such an act had the wrong idea about jumping. A guy of strong build with a rather confident look appeared before them. This young man knew for sure that he had no equal, and he boldly used his strength. Having looked at each of those present, the young man asked if anyone had come from the bureau. There was no answer. The guys were not 100% sure that they could trust him. Already climbing the steps, the guy was indignant. Why so much fuss? Didn't the leader warn that he needed to be in the shadows? This new hero looked overly confident. Among the ordinary zombies, another super monster appeared. Based on his own experience, Francis felt it necessary to warn everyone that this monster would not just die, and it would be better if they got out of here first. The girls did not argue and immediately rushed to the exit. One way or another they will have to use the elevator again. But on their way, that monster with thorns appeared again. Now he was more determined. The appearance of this monster looked creepy. He seemed completely invulnerable. The heroes were faced with a difficult task of how to cope with him. Francis shouted to the girls to be careful. The monster was clearly about to attack. It is certainly impossible to cope with such a fiend of hell alone. The monster rushed to attack. His eyes were red with anger, and he had sharp claws on his hands and feet. This zombie looked invulnerable. Kaylin tried to clear away the debris to clear the entrance to the elevator. At the same time, the girl tried not to lose sight of her surroundings. The monster rushed from side to side, not deciding who to attack first. His reaction was not as immediate as that of humans, and this made his task difficult. Looking at this monster, the main character could not even imagine that he would so soon have to face a zombie of the growth period. The young man was worried about one thing: whether he would have enough strength this time. Having weighed all the pros and cons, Francis came to the conclusion that the skill of controlling metal would not be enough here, and in this case it would be more advisable to use the power of flame. The young man clearly realized that he was no longer the same person he had been before. Now he has some experience and memories from the past. Using the power of fire, Francis made a couple of test strikes to test the endurance of this monster. Alas, there was no visible damage. As expected, the adult zombie's body was stronger, so the force would have to be used differently. The task was complicated by the fact that the young man did not have much time. The main character concentrated all his power in one place, activating the energy of the flame into a more concentrated state. Francis swung and hit the enemy in the face with all his might. This time the monster felt it well. The blow was so powerful that the zombie could not attack back. His face contorted in pain. The monster's entire body was engulfed in fire. Observing her comrade's tactics, Shelley was surprised that the power of the flame could be used in such a way. The zombie stretched his hand with all his might to grab onto his victim, but fortunately the young man was at a safe distance. All this was strange. The monster should have received very significant damage, but alas, he was still alive and not even particularly weakened. The main character was reassured by the fact that this time he was not fighting alone, and this gave him tangible self-confidence. Next to him were two beautiful warriors, and both of them were special in their abilities. The monster continued to take blows, but the good news was that at least he did not attack back. The creature was still unharmed. The girls realized what the point was and began to help Francis, using the same strategy. It was necessary to attack the monster's heart. It was obvious that even during the period of growth, his heart remained a weak point. Now that the heroes had some information, all that remained was to continue striking at the zombie's weak point. In the chest area of the monster, damage was already clearly visible. Francis fought to defeat. A little more, and the zombie will be defeated. The main character dealt blows one after another. But at some point, something happened that he did not expect. The wound on the monster's chest suddenly disappeared, as if it had never been there. The zombie was completely updated and looked even stronger than before this battle. Francis did not expect this. The monster is transforming. Perhaps this is the power of the growth period. The girls, seeing such changes in the zombies, reacted differently. While Shelley was alarmed by these changes, Kaylin looked at the monster as just another toy, perfect for painting. The task has become more complicated. The main character understood that with his current strength, he would not be able to inflict fatal damage on the monster. We can only hope for a miracle or someone else's help. The guy who came up found the situation funny. He must have a good reason to laugh at the current situation. Only someone whose strength surpasses that of any monster could behave this way. The brave man turned out to be Captain Daniel Gill, awakened by the flood level. Daniel was quite surprised to see Shelley here. The guy asked why she was here. Shelley did not go into details, promising to explain everything later. Now the girl asked the captain to help cope with this monster. Having examined the monster, Daniel had already guessed that this zombie was not like any of the crazy people he had previously dealt with. The captain noticed that the monster was well equipped. Shelley said that this zombie is very strong, especially his super strong bone armor. Having assessed all the risks, Daniel prepared to attack this super zombie. The guy already had some experience. Perhaps this monster was different from the others, but all these nuances would become clear as the battle progressed. Daniel boldly walked towards the monster, which may not be as invulnerable as it seems at first glance. As the young man himself admitted, most of all he liked to break hard things. In this case, the captain chose to use close combat techniques. This way you can accurately determine how strong the monster's armor is, and at the same time find its weak point. A powerful fist hit the zombie right on the bridge of his nose. The blow was so strong that there was a sound like an electric discharge. Despite this, the young man had to admit that such monsters were pretty tough nuts to crack. Daniel was not at all frightened by such close contact with the monster. He essentially challenged the monster, not even being afraid to grab his hand. This fight will determine exactly who is stronger, a person with intelligence or an insane but strong zombie. In close combat, the captain used a multi-hit technique to first break the monster's bone armor. The zombie did not have time to follow the movements of the enemy's fists. Although the monster was strong, it lacked the ability to instantly react. Segment by segment, the monster's equipment gradually crumbled, falling to the ground in a hail of small stones. Realizing that things were getting serious, the zombie began to attack his opponent harder. Francis, seeing the danger of the situation, prompted the captain to take advantage of the monster's slowness and attack his heart, which at that moment was no longer covered by armor. The girls who monitored the captain's technique tried to support him at least verbally. Despite the fact that victory in the duel had not yet been achieved, Daniel still deserved admiration. The captain got so close to the monster that he, taking advantage of the moment, grabbed the young man by the shoulders. Daniel was not frightened by such a trick, but rather spurred him to more radical measures. The guy dealt a powerful blow to the zombie's body, trying to break its chest. Subconsciously, the monster was already aware of his imminent defeat, although he continued to hold his opponent. Having located the heart, the captain used all his strength to crush it. But the monster was in no hurry to die, still firmly standing on its feet. Realizing that Daniel could not do without additional help, Francis nevertheless decided to intervene in this fight. Now, when the monster was at the limit of its strength, the protagonist's abilities should have been enough to defeat the zombies. Each blow from Francis was accompanied by a bright flash. A powerful flame, together with the blows of a steel blade, should have completed this too long process. The zombie was already lying on the ground, unable to get up. The main character tirelessly dealt fiery blows, because even a second pause could give the monster an additional chance of survival. The flame had already penetrated inside the monster, and was now bursting out from all its parts. Its heart was counting down its last weak beats. The zombie let out a final scream, soon to fall silent forever. The last final stage of the battle was an incredible explosion. The shockwave was so powerful that the girls lost their balance. With their joint efforts, the guys won. The monster was defeated. Electrical discharges were still emanating from his body, but there was no longer any danger. Only now the main character was finally able to take a close look at this huge monster. Now the captain looked at Francis with a completely different look. He was a worthy ally in the fight against monsters. Such people would be useful on his team. The main character returned the strip of metal to his wrist. It was a safe place for the blade, and also always nearby. Kaylin crouched near the body of the defeated monster to take a closer look at it, because she was not lucky enough to participate in this battle. The girl fell back into childhood, upset that her white drawing board was hopelessly burned. Shelley, who had been in a state of tension and slight stupor all this time, now came to her senses and first of all began to scold the captain for his recklessness and excessive impulsiveness because he could easily lose his life. But Daniel only grinned in response, saying that she underestimated him. But in fact, he was just warming up. When the danger was over, and the heroes could finally afford to relax, the main character decided that it was time to get to know this guy. Francis asked Shelley who he was, her interlocutor. The girl perked up, happily introducing Captain Daniel Gill, adding that he is a flood level awakened. The captain looked friendly at his new ally. Coming closer, the guys introduced themselves and shook hands. If everything continues in the same spirit, they will have a very strong team of professionals. The main character tried to compare his memories from a past life. The name Daniel Gill was unfamiliar to him, but the guy's strength was not weak. Now Francis needed to determine whether he could bind this captain to him. The system notification informed the main character that he was unable to bind Daniel Gill to himself. Francis guessed what the problem might be. Most likely, this captain's heart is much more wary than it seems at first glance. Daniel noted that Francis was quite strong and suggested that they fight together if necessary. The main character supported this idea by making a counter-compliment. Perhaps this will help him get closer to this person and, as a result, tie him to himself. While Kaylin was examining the body of the killed monster, Shelley suggested that they still notify the Bureau about the current circumstances, and it would be advisable to do this as soon as possible. In addition, why the Queen of Flame could not get one important nuance out of her head. The black rain had stopped, but these madmen still had not come to their senses. To this, the captain replied that the Bureau was already aware of this anomaly. Shelley, however, did not understand what was happening here at all, and who these strange people were. Who, in fact, had not been human for a long time. Francis apologized for interjecting in the conversation. He just wanted to clarify which bureau he was talking about, since this was not the first time Shelley had mentioned it. The girl was embarrassed, as if she had been caught at the scene of a crime. But, as Daniel said, there is no harm in telling Francis the truth anymore. In this situation, the Bureau's secrecy program has long since exhausted itself. And then Shelley revealed that she and Captain Daniel were actually employees of the Special Security Bureau. This bureau was an official organization designed to regulate civil awakenings, the main character thought, mechanically repeating the name of the bureau. Noticing that the information interested Francis, the captain asked if the young man had heard of the Special Security Service before. Francis replied that he had heard of such an organization for the first time, and he was very surprised that it turns out that there is official regulation of the activities of the awakened. The main character looked questioningly at Daniel, expecting to hear something else. The captain continued the story. The Bureau exists because not every awakened person is mentally stable. Supernatural forces change a person's consciousness. Francis absolutely agreed with this formulation. To himself, the main character thought that the Special Security Bureau was essentially the predecessor of the Six Senses Society. He could not even imagine that the Six Senses Society was connected with this. Is it possible that they were created before this zombie apocalypse? Turning his gaze to the Flame Queen, Francis thought that it was quite possible that this girl was a representative of the Six Senses Society, which meant that she had been in this organization from the very beginning. Kaylin was completely immersed in her thoughts, continuing to mechanically draw something on the body of the killed monster. Meanwhile, the main character, not forgetting for a minute about his sister, asked if Daniel had encountered anyone else when he came up here. The captain clarified that Francis probably means normal people, and if so, then they are no longer there. Only crazy people remain in the building. The girl absent-mindedly looked through somewhere. Memories of the past haunted her. She tried to distract herself from sad thoughts in this strange way. The main character was afraid to even think that his sister Laura could become one of these crazy people. He desperately pushed the thought away. Until he sees all this with his own eyes, hope will live in his heart. Leaving his comrades, Francis headed in the other direction. The young man needed to check something, otherwise he would not calm down. Shelley tried to stop her friend, but he didn't want to listen. It was necessary to continue the search for my sister. She may not even be in this building. In the first office he came across, the main character discovered several dead people. The bodies were untouched, which means that the zombies did not kill them for food. They were driven by the instinct to simply kill. Francis was angry with himself. The young man believed that his sister was the first to get into trouble, solely because he was reborn. Based on this, it was stupid to follow previous memories if he changed the entire course of current events. Carefully examining every corner of the office, Francis saw something that made his heart clench painfully. His gaze settled on a fragile woman's hand. The young man tried his best to drive away the terrible thoughts. Right in front of him, lying face down on the floor, was a girl very similar to Laura. The guy didn't dare turn it over and check it. He was just biding his time, hoping for a miracle. From fear and powerlessness, the young man burst into tears. He sat down next to her, peering at the lying body. His mind desperately clung to the thought that he was mistaken. It couldn't be her. It couldn't be Laura. There was no point in waiting any longer, come what may. With a trembling hand, Francis took the lying girl by the shoulder, intending to turn her to face him. His heart was beating wildly, and sweat appeared on his forehead. Finally, with a sharp jerk, the young man turned the body over. A disfigured female face appeared before his eyes. Francis almost screamed from the horror he saw. Thank heavens it wasn't Laura. The young man finally breathed a sigh of relief. Most likely the sister and the rest of the people left here before this place fell. Francis went out into the corridor to calm down a little and collect his thoughts on what to do next. The Flame Queen quietly approached him from behind. The girl was very worried about his state of mind. Shelley carefully asked if he had found his sister. The young man replied that he did not find any traces of his sister's presence. They must have managed to leave before the building fell. The girl was sincerely happy. The fact that my sister was not among these crazy people is very good. It means there is still hope, but the main character was still upset. So much time had passed, and he still didn't know where Laura was now. Daniel intervened in the conversation. He roughly guessed where Francis's sister could have gone. The main character grabbed at the words spoken by the captain like a drowning man at a straw. He was eager to know where to look for Laura. Daniel said something very interesting. It turns out that he is here for a reason. The alien energy vibration of the awakened flood level appeared here before, so the captain came here to investigate this phenomenon. Based on this, if Francis's sister was in the building, then most likely she is now with one of the awakened ones. The main character was pleased with this news. The young man asked if Daniel had the opportunity to track the location of the awakened one. The captain answered in the affirmative. He is a professional in his field. The guy took out his phone and pointed to the geolocation icon. There was a group of people in a huge room. Something strange happened to some of them. It was some kind of physiological process that defies description. Among these people was Laura. Those present behaved differently. Some were angry, others were scared. It even reached the point of hysteria. The guy in the tailcoat was the main one among them. The experimenter's name was Alex Atwood. He tried to control the process, while reprimanding those present to behave appropriately. The hand of a guy in a tailcoat lay on the head of one of the subjects, who was placed in some kind of transparent substance. Alex put his hand on the luminous sphere above the test subject, and ominously whispered that they were all valuable material for him. The next moment there was an explosion, and the blue sphere, together with the test subject, crumbled into a pile of crystals. The experimenter laughed evilly, causing even greater horror to those present. People froze in shock. There was nowhere to run, which meant that the same fate awaited them. The scoundrel continued to gloat, reveling in his power. He said with a grin that it hurts him every time he breaks one of these people. At that moment, other laboratory assistants entered the room and informed Alex that the experimental equipment was ready. The laboratory assistants, obediently bowing their heads, waited for further instructions. Alex was pleased with this news and he ordered preparations to begin. A villainous plan had already matured in his head, especially since there was no shortage of experimental subjects. All the test subjects present had their hands tied behind their backs and taken somewhere. People no longer resisted, realizing that it was useless. After looking at the captives with a satisfied look, Alex asked one of the laboratory assistants where Tess Baker and the others were. The man replied that Tess was currently on the second floor. Alex, accusing Tess of laziness in front of everyone, promised to personally find her. He ordered the remaining professionals in the room to take care of other matters for now. His subordinates did not even dare to contradict him. In the huge room where the rest of the experimental subjects were brought, one of the unlucky ones was already lying on the table. The poor fellow had no limbs and was barely alive. The people brought in were still trying to appeal to the reason of their escorts. Laura, like the others, was going to be firmly fixed on the surgical table. The girl cried out with all her strength for help, although she herself already understood that all attempts to escape would be useless. Daniel kept a close eye on the geolocation icon. The awakened ones must have been somewhere nearby, which means Laura was with them. The navigator led the heroes to a huge ancient building. The captain reported that the vibration stopped at this very point. This means that the awakened ones are there inside. Francis, without a moment's hesitation, offered to immediately go inside. He was very worried about his sister. Who knows, maybe the minutes are counting. Francis and Kaylin entered first and boldly walked forward. Just in case, Shelley once again checked with the captain if he was sure that there was even anyone in the building. Daniel considered such doubts as a personal insult. He made the comment that even if they didn't believe him personally, they should at least believe in science. The navigator stubbornly pointed to this place. The main character drew attention to the table with household items left chaotically. It was obvious that the table had not been wiped for a long time, and from the dishes themselves, one could easily guess that they had practically never been used. Francis immediately determined that the place had not been inhabited for a long time. There was a thick trail of dust on his fingers. Daniel wondered how this was possible. The navigator could not deceive him. Shelley, in order to calm the situation a little, suggested that they explore the area a little, since they had already come here. As he climbed to the top floor, Francis began to think. In his head, the mysterious awakened ones, coupled with the previous zombie growth period and the Special Security Bureau, which, most likely, was prepared for this, were not connected in any way. It seems that when the zombie apocalypse came, a lot of things happened that he didn't know about. The main character looked back at the captain, and it seemed to him that he was still behaving suspiciously. Perhaps he was hiding something else. Daniel looked around most of the building and eventually admitted that there was nothing here. Francis tried to find at least some clue. He examined everything, even old dust-covered papers. There were no traces of anything suggestive. The captain continued to insist on his point. The place they need is here, and there is no point in inspecting the objects. Kaylin quipped. The awakened cannot be in the earth or in the sky. The main character seized on this idea, mechanically repeating the words of Kaylin. In the earth or in the sky. So many strange things have happened in the past few days that nothing will surprise him anymore. Shelley noticed that Francis was planning something. The girl asked if he had come up with something. The young man tried to deduce some kind of logical chain. In the end, the navigator brought them here for a reason. Staring at the floor, the main character suggested that they could really be underground. The guy even thought he heard some subtle sounds. This idea seemed to Shelley not without meaning, because the building had a basement. The young people thought about how best to act in this situation. Daniel, unlike the others, was not one to think for long. As Shelley once noted, he was impulsive. So now he decided that there was no point in thinking if he could just find out. The Flame Queen was shocked at what he intended to do. The girl tried to stop the captain, but his powerful fist was already raised to strike. The floor beneath them could not stand it and broke into pieces. Kevin and his friend were in the basement at that moment. The guys were terribly scared, not knowing what would happen to them now. They had no idea that their dark deeds would turn against them. Kevin's friend was hysterical. He couldn't even imagine what these people needed from them. The guy annoyed Kevin with his endless questions, but he himself did not understand anything. At the same moment, the ceiling above them began to collapse, showering with a heap of fragments. The already frightened red-haired guy almost had a heart attack. Pieces of the ceiling fell right under their feet. Now he screamed in fear for a different reason. The comrade was hysterical, screaming like crazy. But a few days earlier, he considered himself an incredibly brave and tough bandit. Squinting his eyes from the dust, Daniel proudly landed in the basement. Francis was right. There really is something down there. Together with the captain, the rest slowly descended into the basement. Taking a closer look, Kaylin noticed that they were not alone here. The girl pointed her finger at Kevin Gibbs. Francis was surprised that he was immediately lucky enough to find the right person. Out of fear, Kevin literally pressed himself against the wall. Not only is he being held captive by someone unknown, but they have also come down from the ceiling to get him. In a trembling voice, the bandit muttered whether they really knew him. The main character could hardly contain his anger. The guy grabbed the hilt of the blade and answered the bandit that, of course, he knew him, because he kidnapped his sister, and he himself set the condition that Francis come in person. The young man pulled out his fiery sword and approached the bandits. And if it weren't for Laura, the main character would have killed these scoundrels right now in this basement. Kevin and his comrade would probably have experienced the full force of Francis's anger if something had not distracted him. Something fell again directly from above. This time it was not stones, but some kind of huge blue crystal. He couldn't have fallen himself, so someone sent him here. Something was also flying behind Daniel. It was an incomprehensible stone, shrouded in fiery energy. Another moment and the captain could have received a rather powerful blow in the back. The captain had a very good reaction. He quickly got his bearings and kicked the stone away. Now all that remains is to find out who threw him. The one who threw did not limit himself to one stone. Something flew from above again. Plumes of white smoke filled everything around. It was a sneak attack, and the one who did it was clearly not confident in his abilities. The captain waited for the stone thrower himself to appear, but he was in no hurry to show himself. Suddenly, a sphere appeared. It was of an ideal shape with clearly defined edges. There was a bluish glow around the sphere itself. Alex Atwood applauded defiantly, admitting that Daniel was quite strong. The experimenter preferred to fight from a distance, and in this dishonest way. Finally, the scoundrel decided to go down to the uninvited guests. He was not alone. There was a girl next to him, who kept a little distance. The experimenter immediately switched to rudeness, calling Daniel a dog that followed him on his heels. Alex Atwood and Tess Baker were both peak flood awakeners. Daniel also did not choose expressions, suggesting that Alex rinse out his mouth. It stinks. The captain was determined, especially now that the object he was following was right in front of his eyes. Taking advantage of the moment, Kevin turned to Francis, pointing his finger at the experimenters that they were the ones who took his sister. And Kevin himself had nothing to do with this. The bandits' tactics worked, and Francis attacked the experimenters, asking where his sister was. The expression in the young man's eyes did not raise any doubts. It was better not to joke with him. Alex was surprised, not understanding who exactly he was talking about. This guy is used to the fact that only he asks questions and no one dares to threaten him. Having replaced the surprised look with an impudent grin, the experimenter clarified that we were apparently talking about consumables. He thought for a second about how to phrase his answer more wittily. The scoundrel smiled evilly and replied, "The girl is most likely already dead." He was an arrogant, unprincipled man, begging for harsh punishment with all his appearance. After such words, the main character became numb with horror. His eyes were focused on one point, as if he could not grasp the meaning of what was said. Francis was in despair. He refused to accept this reality. The young man did not understand the meaning of his reincarnation. Even when he got another opportunity, couldn't fate be changed? Alex enjoyed the fact that he was now the master of the situation. Realizing his impunity, the scoundrel became even more impudent, declaring that the guests had arrived just in time to take the girl's body. The words of this bastard in a tailcoat instantly infuriated Shelley. The flames had already activated around the girl's fingers. The Queen of Flame would gladly throw out all her fiery emotions on the experimenters. Such scoundrels deserve the harshest punishment for all their terrible experiences. Kaylin, being more impulsive than Shelley, without hesitation, pointed several steel spears at the evil couple. Such scoundrels deserved a special place in hell. Alex, still with the same grin, raised his hand up, intending to stop the sudden attack. The scoundrel was amused by such a manifestation of violence in his direction. The steel spear launched by Kalen pierced the huge blue crystal, but nothing happened. The villains were not harmed at all. Kalen had to admit that this experimenter's defenses were quite strong. It looks like the guys will have much bigger problems with this bastard than with zombies. After an unsuccessful attempt to strike, Alex became really angry. Now it was his turn to attack, especially since his new targets turned out to be not as strong as they wanted to seem. The guy in the tailcoat fixed his gaze on Kalen, who was attacking him. He put all his anger and strength into retaliating. Sharp spears flew in the direction of the girl, leaving her with a very weak chance of defense. However, Kalen contrived and intercepted the flying blades with both hands. The attack was strong and the girl was even scared. What Alex did was not only a kind of defense, but also a real attack. Now it was scary to imagine what this man was capable of. This awakened one turned out to be too strong, and, it seems, the only way out is to gather all our power and hit him together, as a team. Captain Daniel was also a difficult person. This guy had a level 4 A-class bloody berserker skill, and the time has come to demonstrate to these scoundrels everything that he is capable of. At that moment, someone grabbed the captain's legs. Tenacious male hands were reaching out to him straight from the floor. The grip was quite strong, and the captain risked losing his balance. Whether it was a distracting maneuver by the experimenter or a call for help is unknown, but whoever grabbed the captain still managed to take him out of the game. Shelley tried to warn Daniel, but some strange movement also began next to her. The floor broke, and some kind of energy lava burst out. A huge hole appeared in the floor, leading to an unknown destination. Perhaps there were people there too, although it is possible that there could be monsters underneath. Alex, at that moment, focused all his attention on Kalen. The villain pointed a huge shield studded with sharp spikes in her direction. The shield literally glowed with powerful blue energy, which was very difficult to resist. But Kalen did not give up. The girl was desperately brave and intended to pierce her opponent right through. Despite this shell, the young lady concentrated all her energy, putting all her skills into this blow. The shield shattered into crystals, ready to fall on their creator. In addition to this, the girl created her own blade, threatening to make a huge hole in the enemy. Alex became furious. He did not expect that the fragile-looking girl would be so strong. The scoundrel's only desire was to kill his rival at any cost. The next moment there was an explosion, creating another hole in the floor. Plumes of white smoke filled everything around. Through the thickness of the smoke, the outlines of two people standing close to each other were visible. It was Kalen and Alex. This time, Kalen's calculations did not come true. Alex remained safe and sound, unlike the girl herself. The poor thing was still damaged. When the smoke cleared, it became obvious what exactly had happened. The girl's body was pierced with a steel spear. Alex gloated, anticipating his victory, and even being in such an unenviable position, Kalen did not give up. The girl said that everything was correct, which plunged her opponent into a state of bewilderment. Kalen looked straight into the eyes of her enemy, confidently asserting that he had finally been caught. The girl grabbed both of Alex's hands, trying to hold them. It's unclear what exactly Kalen intended to do, but she was now turning to Francis. The girl told the main character that now is the time for revenge, and that he should not be so stupid. Francis agreed that now was not the time to indulge in reflection. Holding a fiery sword in his hand, the young man walked towards his enemy. The main character understood that a lot depended on him now. Therefore, he must do everything correctly, because it is unlikely that such an opportune moment will arise again. Francis walked quickly towards the experimenters standing nearby. Every second of delay threatened to result in the collapse of all hopes. Kalen still held her opponent's hands, while Tess stood calmly behind, not even making an attempt to help out her accomplice. All her attention was turned to Francis approaching them. It seems that Tess was indifferent to what would happen to her companion, or she was 100% sure that he would find a way out of any situation. The girl effectively raised her hands up and invited the main character to get to know him better. Tess concentrated all the energy into a blue ball and directed it at Francis. The girl was floating in the air, surrounded by a blue glow from which electric discharges emanated. Crystals flying out of the sphere exploded right at the protagonist's feet, but that didn't stop him. At this moment, Alex freed his hands, leaving the wounded Kalen alone. This was his fight by right, and he warned Tess not to interfere. As for Francis, it seemed to Kalen that the right moment had been missed, and this made the girl extremely upset. Another second, and Alex would have approached Francis, but suddenly something stopped him. Ropes stretched from the floor straight to his arms and legs, tightly wrapping around his entire body. The binding and immobilization of the scoundrel was the work of Kaelin. The girl gathered all her strength to finally finish off the enemy. The experimenter still fell into the trap she had prepared. Taking advantage of the moment, the main character raised his sword over his weakened opponent. The experimenter was finally lucky enough to fully experience what it was like to be helpless, like his experimental subjects. Alex's whole body was filled with fear. He was very afraid of dying, and these two were more serious than ever. The scoundrel feverishly turned over in his mind how he could get out of this situation. At the last moment, the experimenter decided to call upon an ice shield to help him. He concentrated and directed a powerful stream of energy directly in front of him. If he had done this a second later, the blow of the enemy's fiery sword would have destroyed him. But this time, luck was on his side. Francis, despite the complicated situation, continued to strike, because the life of his sister Laura also depended on it. All his movements were imbued with fiery determination. Without a doubt, only one would survive. The entire space around the rivals shook from the powerful clashes of their weapons. The fiery energy of the sword, with bright flashes, enveloped everything in heat and blazing light. The cold crystals of the shield could not withstand such an attack, breaking into small fragments. Kaelin, despite a serious wound, was still alive. Shelley ran to her, hoping to somehow help. There was little time left, and the life of her friend was a sacred value for her. More important even than her own safety. The Queen of Flame grabbed Kaelin by the shoulders, preventing her from falling. Shelley tried to convince her friend that it was extremely dangerous to continue now. She needed to stop the bleeding immediately, because if this was not done, she could die. One could only envy Kaelin's stubbornness. The girl insistently assured that everything was fine with her. Despite the sharp pain, Kaelin grabbed the spear that was piercing her body with her hand and sharply pulled it out. The girl, gathering her will into a fist, swung and threw a spear at her enemy. The weapon had to hit the target. She put all her remaining strength into her throw. The main character stopped for a moment, so as not to disturb Kaelin. The experimenter should not have survived. All three tensely followed the flight path of the pointed crystal. It had to return to the one who created it to remain in his body forever. Alas, Alex was still unharmed. The scoundrel gloated again, reveling in his superiority. He enjoyed every moment when he saw his opponents in a hopeless situation, considering it his victory. The heroes were simply beside themselves with indignation in the face of the evil that they saw before them. And this anger is ready to become a source of power, prompting them to act and fight to the very end. At the same time, in another part of the basement, a noise was heard from a hole in the floor. There was clearly more than one person there. Right under the floor at the bottom of this hole lay Captain Daniel. And the same mysterious stranger who had dragged the guy here was leaning over him with a malicious smile. He was a large, stocky man with spikes on his shoulders. Looking at the lying Daniel, the thug mockingly said that it must be difficult for him to breathe. The thug's name was Ivari. He was a flood-level awakened. Ivari had not yet shown any signs of aggression, although he gloated that rats, who had always been looked down upon, were in fact easily adaptable to life underground. The captain thought about the words of the mutant standing above him and carefully clarified that he apparently controls the earth. It is unknown what else could be expected from this creature. Ivari openly laughed at Daniel's helpless situation, that he was now worse than a rat. The mutant advised, before the body rotted, to enjoy the tranquility of life underground. One of the crystal fragments still hit Alex. Some strange crystallization process began to occur to him. The experimenter himself became a crystal. Still under the cover of the shield, Alex grouped some of the crystals into spikes and launched them at his opponent. The main character was also protected. It was a powerful fiery aura. The crystals continuously flew towards Francis, burning in the flames of his protective aura. Alex activated his power so much that it seemed that this process would last forever. Alas, the main character was forced to admit that this scoundrel had become stronger again. Alex laughed like crazy, calling everyone ants and threatening to kill them. At this time, a roar was heard from underground. Someone was moving towards the surface. Ivari jumped out from under the floor next to Tess. The mutant grinned. They still weren't finished, and Alex went crazy again. Tess agreed. Her companion liked to do this. The main character rushed towards his enemy, one way or another. But this had to be ended. Alex relentlessly attacked his opponent, throwing spears made of crystals with inexorable power, but the young man deftly dodged, moving in a zigzag manner. The main character needed to get to this scoundrel and stop him. Francis was under the reliable protection of a fiery aura, and no crystals frightened him. The young man had a goal, and he would achieve it at any cost. The main character was so angry that he was ready to incinerate his enemy with a glance. This scoundrel deserved the most severe punishment, and Francis will become his executioner. The young man concentrated all his power and energy, and then sharply threw his fiery sword straight at the target. There was no longer a protective shield in front of Alex. He had wasted everything attacking his opponent. A fiery spear flew at great speed straight towards the experimenter. Whirlwinds of flame around this weapon were ready to burn everything that came along the way. Alex was still confident in his invulnerability. He was even amused that the newcomer standing opposite him decided to throw away his weapon right in the middle of the battle. But literally, a moment later, the experimenter was no longer laughing. The fiery spear reached its target. Alex was on the verge of madness. He either feared for his life, or laughed at the inexperience and frivolity of his opponent. The fiery spear spun like a top, causing enormous damage to the scoundrel's aura. The flames filled everything around, burning even the air the enemy breathed. The next moment there was an explosion. Clouds of flames scattered in huge rings throughout the area. Francis watched with ecstasy as the greatest evil suffered, responsible for dozens of ruined lives. Justice still triumphed. The experimenter stood surrounded by fire. He suffered, but did not die. The fiery spear only deprived him of his left arm. The scoundrel was very upset. He paid for his excessive self-confidence. The main character was even more upset. He was sure that he had defeated the greatest evil, but in fact he had only slightly crippled him. How many more troubles can such a mistake bring? Francis couldn't leave all this unfinished. They simply had to rid the world of this scoundrel. But how can you defeat him? Seeing how his comrades suffered, Ivari decided to intervene. For him, Francis became the main target. The mutant decided to attack. The monster's blow landed directly on the main character's shoulder. The young man did not expect this and made no attempt to defend himself. Now he has one more enemy. Not even a minute had passed before the young man was dealt another blow, from which he turned over in the air, caught in an icy whirlwind. This time Tess attacked, and she did it meanly and on the sly. The Queen of Flame tried to awaken at least a semblance of conscience and honor in the minds of her enemies. When their accomplice could not defeat the enemy alone, they decided to fight in a crowd with one person. But Tess and Ivari did not know such a thing as honor and conscience. They were and remain ordinary scum, and were simply incapable of fighting honestly. Alex was forced to admit that he had met a worthy opponent. He did not expect everything to happen exactly like this. The experimenter has already guessed that Francis is an awakened one who has two powers. Although Alex was a scoundrel, he appreciated the strength and incredible abilities of his opponent. The main character deliberately hid his ability to control metal in order to keep the enemy in suspense. The young man hoped to kill his enemy with one blow, but he blocked it. Plus, he has two accomplices, an electric one and a stone one. The rivals stood opposite each other. The main character realized that despite the equal numbers, the forces were unequal. Daniel was dragged away by the stone man. Kaylin was seriously injured, and Shelley couldn't adapt to this stage of the fight. It turns out that the only one who can fight is Francis. The young man decided that even if he was alone against three, he must kill them to avenge his sister. While the three villains stood waiting, something began to move right at Ivari's feet. It felt like the earth was about to open up. The next moment the floor broke, and Daniel jumped out. The captain grabbed the stone man by the throat, not allowing him to come to his senses. The guy threw the monster to the ground and began to choke him. The attack was so powerful and unexpected that Ivari could not figure out what to do. He never expected to see Daniel alive, much less here. The young man struck the monster one after another, while saying that he had already enjoyed peace. The stone man lay helpless on the ground, unable to resist. Suddenly, out of the blue, a whirlwind and clouds of smoke appeared. The whirlwind rushed somewhere to the side at high speed, raising clouds of dust on its way. Dust and small stones flew to Francis and Shelley, who were standing a little further away, forcing them to instinctively cover their hands to protect their faces. What it was is unclear. Everything turned out to be banal simple. Ivari, unable to fight openly, decided to dodge the blows by hiding underground. The captain grinned. The enemy showed good speed, like for a rat. At the same time, he demonstrated to everyone his inability to fight. Ivari crawled underground for several meters, and again climbed to the surface, shamefully hiding behind Tess. The monster admitted defeat. Finally approaching Francis, the captain asked if he was able to continue the battle. The main character grinned in response, saying that this was a simple warm-up for him. Daniel was happy to know that his comrade was okay. He offered to skin these rats together. At this moment, the main character receives a system notification. He and Captain Daniel have become comrades in arms. The possibility of communication has been achieved. Plus, the system promised to issue numerous return rewards. As one of the rewards, the main character receives a rank A ability, Bloody Berserker. While the rest of the accomplices stood calmly, wondering what to do next, Alex was practically in a state of hysterics. He fiercely hated the people opposite, still considering them ants. Tess tried to calm her friend down. The girl said that the evacuation was almost complete, and they also needed to hurry up to prepare for removal. But Alex didn't want to listen to this, demanding that he not be told what to do. The girl again tried to calm Alex down. Her companion was clearly not himself. He was just screaming, not understanding where he was. Realizing that there would be no point, Tess asked Ivari to take Alex away from here and let the crazy people out. The stone man objected to keeping them here, because they had put a lot of effort into catching these maniacs. The girl insisted on her point. These are just dead crazy people and they can always find others. Ivari grabbed the experimenter by the arms and began to dive underground. Seeing this, the main character was outraged that the enemies would go unpunished. Francis and Daniel rushed in pursuit. The scoundrels must not be allowed to escape. They must be destroyed. Tess ordered her accomplices not to stop. She would detain the pursuers. The electrical spheres around the girl became active again. Every movement of her hands conveyed confidence in her abilities. With a smooth movement of her fingers, Tess pushed the electric balls towards her opponents. Blue spheres calmly floated in the air next to the protagonist's face, but nothing happened yet. Despite the danger, such proximity to the electric ball did not frighten the captain at all. Tess continued to perform some incomprehensible manipulations with her fingers. The glowing balls obeyed her, as if they were alive. Suddenly the electric spheres began to make a crackling sound and moved forward sharply. Daniel and Francis knew that in this situation it was better to dodge and run away than to fight. The young men fled in the direction of the mistress of these spheres. In addition, the calculation was also made that Tess would not risk exploding these spheres next to her face. Daniel laughed at the girl, reproaching her for her mistake. Such an accusation provoked the electric lady even more. She snapped her fingers again, activating the sphere's power enhancement. One of the spheres hit the ceiling next to Shelley and Kaylin. Quite large stones began to break off from above, and it became unsafe to be there. The roar kept growing, as if the building was collapsing. Shelley, showing real concern, covered her friend with her arms. Stones fell from everywhere, but Tess still didn't stop. Her technique allowed her to fight the enemy without the need for close combat. Tess smiled evilly, noticing that the guys were looking around in fear. The girl continued to activate new electrical spheres. The building was ready to collapse, burying everyone who was in it. There could be no talk of any fight. All the guys' thoughts were directed towards how to save themselves and their girlfriends, who suddenly disappeared from sight. The rockfall has stopped. Daniel stated that this was not a deadly attack, but rather a demonstration of abilities. But the mistress of the electrical spheres herself managed to escape. Kaylin and Shelley were nowhere to be seen. Most likely they were buried under a pile of stones. Voices seemed to be coming from there. The captain thought he heard Shelley's voice somewhere, but where exactly was unclear. There were still pillars of dust and smoke in the basement, and single small stones were falling down from the ceiling. The young men stood, intently listening to where the sound was coming from. Now they thought they heard Kaylin's voice. The situation was already beginning to seriously worry them. Shelley gradually regained consciousness. The girl did not understand where she was. She even had the thought that she had died. There were rocks above her. Unlike Shelley, Kaylin clearly understood what had happened to them. She asked her friend how long she was going to pretend to be dead. It's time to stop panicking and try to get out. Shelley hinted to her friend that it was within her competence to control the metal. Kaylin was grateful to her friend that she covered her with herself to save her. However, the girl made a remark to the Queen of Flame that she was a little bothered when her friend settled on her. Shelley apologized and moved aside. Suddenly, Kaylin felt bad again. The girl urgently needed help. Shelley was in a panic. Kaylin was bleeding from her mouth, and the wound on her stomach was starting to bother her again. The Queen of Flame looked at her dying friend in confusion. The girl was very weak. She almost lost consciousness. Shelley didn't know at all how to help. The only thing she did was ask her friend how she was feeling. Kaylin reassured her that everything was fine with her. Hearing the voices of Daniel and Francis, the Flame Queen began to scream loudly to be discovered. The girl desperately hoped for help. Perhaps Kaylin could still be saved. Finally, the guys determined where the voices were coming from. In front of them was a huge pile of stones. Kaylin and Shelley were buried under the rubble. Francis immediately activated his skill and in an instant carefully removed the stones blocking the exit of the captives. Seeing the guys, the Queen of Flame finally breathed a sigh of relief. She held her wounded friend as best she could. The main character asked if they were okay, although the answer was already obvious. The bandits, whom everyone had forgotten about, were still sitting in the basement, huddled in a corner, and trembling with fear. Kevin has already regretted 1,000 times that he got involved in this adventure. His red-haired accomplice urged him to run away as soon as possible. The bandit pointed to an exit through which one could try to escape unnoticed. It was necessary to use this chance before they were discovered. Kevin didn't argue. They needed to escape as quickly as possible, because the brother of the girl they kidnapped was extremely dangerous for them. With a creeping gait, the bandits rushed to the exit. A couple more steps and they will be saved. The heroes stood in the empty basement and thought about how to proceed. Kaylin couldn't walk, and this made the task much more difficult. At the moment, Francis was interested in only one question: whether Daniel would be able to identify the awakened ones again. The captain listened. Something was bothering him. The guy took out his phone and connected the navigator. The system clearly showed that the scoundrels did not go far, but stopped somewhere nearby. The navigation icon on the screen did not move, and the signal was quite clear. The main character thought, if the villains stopped, then you can't waste a minute. You need to follow them in hot pursuit. At this moment, a noise was heard in one of the corridors. The girls were even more frightened, but Francis asked them to wait on the spot while they checked what was happening there. The calculation of Kevin and his accomplice turned out to be extremely unsuccessful. Hungry zombies were waiting for them in the side corridor. The bandits ran as fast as they could, but the madmen had almost overtaken them. The zombies stretched their clawed hands towards fresh food, which was saved as best they could. Suddenly, the red-haired bandit had an idea. The guy advised to run back to the awakened ones, and then they would be saved. Kevin did not support his accomplice's idea, saying that he had a more interesting plan. With an evil grin, he grabbed the redhead's shoulder and stopped him. Kevin's plan turned out to be brilliantly simple. He grabbed his accomplice and abruptly threw him back right into the clutches of the hungry monsters. Red never expected such a betrayal, and vowed to take revenge on the boss. While the monsters were tearing his accomplice apart, Kevin managed to break away a fairly decent distance. Someone was standing in the way ahead. The bandit ran even faster, asking for help. As it turned out, Francis and Daniel were standing right in front of Kevin. The bandit ran straight into their arms. In a stuttering voice, Kevin said that behind him hordes of cannibalistic maniacs were roaming the corridors. The bandit looked pleadingly at the guys, hoping that they would still help him. In return, he promised to do whatever they wanted. Francis was literally boiling with anger. This bastard kidnapped and held his sister, and now he still dares to hope for help. Emotions took over. The main character sharply grabbed Kevin by the throat and pressed him to the wall. The bandit took his breath away from surprise. He did not expect this. Looking straight into the eyes of the scoundrel, Francis demanded to give at least one reason why he should not kill him. The main character did not expect that he would answer anything, but unexpectedly, the bandit said that the young man's sister might not have died yet. Yes, that was a good reason to spare the scoundrel. The main character continued to keep Kevin in limbo. The young man still didn't quite grasp the meaning of what was said, but the bandit practically got his chance to live. Francis demanded to know what the scoundrel meant. If her sister is alive, then why isn't she with Kevin, who kidnapped her? The bandit began to say that blue-haired guy said that they were some kind of valuable specimens. So Laura was taken away for experiments immediately after Francis arrived. Perhaps she is still alive. Kevin begged to spare him, for which he promised to give a lot of money. The main character could barely restrain himself from dealing with this bastard right there. Daniel intervened in the situation. The captain asked Francis to pull himself together, because this bandit had not changed yet, so he should not be killed. Kevin clung to the captain's words, repeating that he was still a normal person, and if they killed him, it would be illegal. The main character wondered if this bandit, after what he had done, had the right to call himself a normal person. The young man repeated this out loud. The flame energy gradually activated in his hands, increasing with each passing second. The fire spread further, reaching Kevin's face. The frightened bandit screamed as hard as he could. He couldn't understand what they wanted from him. Seeing no point in leaving this scoundrel alive, Francis gave vent to his flame. The fire quickly spread to Kevin's body, burning him alive. For Francis, this scoundrel has long lost his human appearance. He is no longer human. The main character unclenched his hand and left the bandit's body to burn. The captain did not share Francis's position, not understanding why he needed to kill this, even stupid and useless, but still a man. The main character distracted the captain from his thoughts, reminding him that his goal was the awakened ones, and if they stayed in the basement for too long, they would run away again. Daniel's look spoke for itself. The guy was very surprised how Francis knew about this. The main character admitted that he was close to believing the lie about the investigation of psychic waves, until he saw with his own eyes the reaction of the awakened to the appearance of uninvited guests. The captain listened silently, and Francis, meanwhile, continued to explain. When the four of them suddenly burst into the base of the other side, they were not at all surprised, but, on the contrary, behaved as if they were preparing for this. Seeing his comrades' confusion, the main character now moved on to accusations. He accused the captain of lying from the very beginning, saying that he could allegedly help save his sister. But in fact, I wasn't even sure that my sister was among the awakened ones. Francis continued to accuse his comrade. Daniel already knows the situation on the other side and understands that he can defeat them alone, so he wanted to use his sister as an excuse to drag Francis with him. The captain admitted that his comrade was right. There was only one amendment. Daniel assured that he had not lied when he could not find his sister's body, and therefore assumed that it was probably stolen by this particular group of awakened ones. As it turned out, the captain's assumptions were correct. The main character was no longer angry, but now, after everything that had happened, he believed that he should get information about this group from the captain. Daniel replied that it would be impossible to share information now, because they would be busy with other things. And indeed, a group of crazy people was approaching the guys. The zombies, when they finally found a way out of the closed room, now ran as fast as they could to their intended victims. The monsters were hungry, but even more so they felt the need to simply kill everyone alive. The captain dealt with the monsters with his usual movements, as if he did this every day. For crazy people, trying to attack the awakened ones was obviously a disastrous endeavor. But due to the lack of intelligence, they did not realize this. The monsters rushed towards the guys in an endless stream, as if someone had opened a floodgate. Daniel was not frightened by these creatures. What was strange for him was why there were so many zombies here. Francis did not waste his energy on each zombie individually. He simply activated his metal manipulation power in order to end this all quickly. A moment later, with one wave of his hand, the main character nailed several crazy people with steel spears. From the outside it looked quite impressive. Francis with one hand held the created shield, on which the madmen were hanging on pins. Daniel paused for a moment to admire the sight. In fact, the captain felt envy. Other people's skills and abilities always looked cooler than your own. Suddenly, for some unknown reason, all the crazy people suddenly turned around and started running away. This was quite strange, given the lack of even basic intelligence in these creatures. The main character decided that he had to catch up with them. He asked the captain to wait for him on the spot. The girls, left to their own devices, also fought with the madmen, or rather, only Shelley did this. The Queen of Flame was quite satisfied with her skills, but Kaylin did not appreciate this whole fire show, making the remark that her friend was not using her abilities in an original enough way. Shelley did not discuss this. She had no time now. The Fire Lady also noticed that there were somehow a suspiciously large number of monsters. If she fails to contain them, she and Kaylin will die. The friend seemed to read her sad thoughts, assuring her that Francis would return soon. Shelley asked how her friend knew this. Kaylin's answer was quite strange. The girl said that their friend was one of them. He is also one of the crazy ones. The zombies kept coming and coming, only to die from steel blows. All of them, without exception, ended up being impaled on spears. In Kaylin's eyes, Francis was like a superhero. He always appears at the right moment and always saves. The captain, meanwhile, fought tirelessly against the madmen. The guy didn't have a super weapon in his hands, but he had super strength, killing zombies literally with his bare hands. Many monsters had already been neutralized, but they were replaced by new ones, and this number was constantly growing. It seemed as if the madmen were coming off some kind of hellish assembly line. When Francis returned, the captain had almost finished dealing with the zombies. He suggested that everyone go first, and then he would catch up. The main character put the wounded Kalen on his back and headed towards the exit. Killed zombies lay everywhere. Others wandered between their bodies, following the scent of living people. The captain hurried his crew. They needed to quickly leave the basement, and he would cover from behind. The main character compared crazy people to annoying flies. They constantly attacked them. All this looked quite strange, because even if the team moves to another place, zombies inexplicably still find them. The captain didn't quite understand what Francis meant. The main character expressed his guess that everything that happens is competently organized by someone. These maniacs seemed to slow them down as if on command. Daniel found such guesses strange, explaining the situation in his own way. He admitted that the crazy were gradually beginning to come to their senses. Francis did not explain, but he knew for sure that the process of becoming a zombie was irreversible. And only by entering the 5th stage can one gain sanity and consciousness. Although there was another option. Memories from a past life surfaced in Francis's memory. He and his sister and other guys were sitting by the fire, and Ryan Dauman was also with them. Ryan was older and knew a lot. Francis then asked if someone could manipulate zombies. Ryan replied that such a manager exists. His code name is the Zombie King. This is an awakened disaster-level person, and he is a very famous person. There were also rumors that in the place where the Zombie King lives, there are practically no living people. There are only terrible zombies. The main character then replied that zombies often deserve more trust than so-called companions, who can stab you in the back at any moment. Kalen distracted the main character from his memories. It seemed to the girl that Francis was worried about something. The guy reassured his girlfriend that everything was fine. But in fact, the thought of these crazy people running them never left his mind. Still, he hoped that he was wrong, and the Zombie King would not appear so early. There was a pile of stones in the path of the young people, but the captain solved such problems without any problems. One kick and the path was clear. Finally, after a long stay in the basement, the heroes went upstairs. It was already dark outside. The streets seemed empty, although in fact there were flocks of crazy people roaming somewhere. The main character again asked Daniel if he could still track the awakened ones. The captain was upset that now, alas, this would not work. The maniacs appeared there for a reason. They slowed down their entire process. The young man asked Francis if he would return to the base with them. The main character thought about it. Kalen's injury requires immediate treatment, and besides, Francis intended to continue the search for that group of people. At the same time, it is necessary to use the power that is behind Daniel and the others. Francis asked if the captain was allowed to bring outsiders with him. Daniel explained that in this situation, every awakened one is a force to be reckoned with. The Bureau will not refuse. The captain's answer was convincing, and the main character decides to go with him to the base. Daniel explained that there was no need to rush now. He had already sent the coordinates to the station. They should be here soon. The captain took a flashlight from his pocket and turned it on, directing the beam upward. The sky above them lit up with thousands of bright sparks. It was an incredibly beautiful fireworks display. Seeing the signal given from the ground, a military helicopter flew up to the place where the young people were standing. Such efficiency and organization looked very cool. Kalen was immediately placed on a stretcher and carried inside the helicopter. While Francis and Shelley were positioned in the helicopter, Captain Daniel gave final instructions. His colleagues will have to deploy a logistics team to complete the job and comb the area for survivors. Finally, the helicopter took off and the heroes left this troubled place. Francis looked out the window sadly. Somewhere down there his sister remained. You just need to wait a little. He will definitely come back for her. In the office of another group of awakened ones, there were documents on the table that someone had forgotten in a hurry. These were important papers, and they would definitely come back for them. Laura, Francis Crofton's sister, was listed as subject 17201 in the documents. It stated that the first phase of the experiment was successful, initially awakening her abilities. A conflict occurred between the partners. Alex was terribly angry with Tess. He was ready to attack the girl with his fists. It was good that Ivari held him back. The stone man asked him to calm down his impulsiveness a little. The main experimenter was furious because his companion allowed herself to stun him. They were distracted from continuing the quarrel by a bell. The awakened ones mechanically turned their heads towards the telephone. Alex clicked the reply button. He had no idea who it might be that was bothering them. Their boss called. The man explained that he was disappointed in Alex. Blue-haired tried to make excuses that if Tess had not stunned him, he would have brought the matter to the end. The boss did not listen to excuses, but warned that a special security service was already monitoring them. The boss also said they would have to hide for some time. After this, the boss addressed Ivari, calling him Michael. The boss explained that Ivari's ability was more suited to mobility, so this time he would work with Bram to replenish it. Bram's ability will be important to them in the future. The boss suggested that since the world was in turmoil, the special security service would soon run out of steam. The boss also reminded Alex and Tess that they were in charge of the second phase of the experiment, and warned them not to make similar mistakes again. The special security service was located in a huge building with glass walls. It was here that Daniel and Francis arrived. Along the outside of the building, a stream of fiery energy rose straight into the sky. The one who controlled this fire was a man of extreme strength with the prospect of further improvement. Daniel looked on in admiration at the demonstration of the skill that Francis possessed. The captain already understood that the destructive power of his comrade had reached the level of a flood. Daniel explained that with this ability, Francis would be able to add his name to the directory of high-potential abilities. The main character still didn't fully understand what he was talking about. He would like to hear more detailed explanations. The captain said that we are talking about a special list of abilities of Class S and above. This list was compiled by the Bureau itself. Daniel asked if Francis had heard of the sensory domain. The main character said that he knows what extrasensory abilities are. This is the result of a person's development of the sensory field. Daniel confirmed that everyone indeed has a sensory field, but it is the awakened ones who are most sensitive to it. The captain also added that there are gifted people who can simultaneously work with several sensory fields, and after awakening their special abilities, their attributes will be very difficult to determine. The young man also said that the abilities of multisensory domains may not be more powerful than those of single-sensory domains. However, in most cases, multisensory domains result in more complex, powerful, or high-potential abilities. As an example, the captain cited his power Bloody Berserker. This ability transcends two areas of perception, manipulation and spirituality. The main character understood everything, clarifying that it is not the number of domains itself that is important, but the ability to combine them. The captain confirmed this. Francis recalled that when he used the powers of Shelley and Kaylin, it seemed to him that he was using it as his own, as his hand. The only thing is that sometimes when using Kaylin's power, the main character felt negativity in his body. This is due to the fact that her abilities did not merge with his other two abilities. The guy finally realized that all this is the real power of the Doomsday binding system. And we are not talking about connecting all the forces without fear, but about choosing those that can be merged together, and thus create the strongest abilities. The captain asked if Francis would like to play this game with him, because it would be great. But the main character refused, promising to try next time. Then Daniel decided to change the topic. He told his friend that, as he had expected, the Bureau was now looking for crazy people in the city who act in an organized manner. Daniel wondered if Francis really believed that the other group could control them. The main character replied that he could not be absolutely sure of this. But this was the only possible clue that they had. The captain nevertheless expressed the hope that his friend was mistaken. Otherwise it would be very scary if it turns out that there is a person who is capable of controlling these crazy people. Just thinking about it makes you feel uneasy. While talking, the friends did not notice how they approached the shelter building. A girl was looking out of the window. It was clear that she was peering intently at the approaching guys. The main character recognized this lady. He never expected to see her here and now. Francis's mother continued to peer at the young man. He looks very much like her son, but the woman herself had doubts, deciding that it was her imagination. The young man quickly ducked around the corner so as not to be recognized. He was very worried about his mother. She should be safe now. Francis's heart was heavy. He did not know how to look into his mother's eyes now. Kaylin was in the hospital. Things were getting better for the girl. She felt much better. Seeing Francis enter the room, the girl was very happy. She asked if he had finished his test. The friend replied that it was done. He asked what she was drawing there. Kaylin said she was drawing him. The girl unfolded the piece of paper and asked if she did it well. Francis laughed and replied that the drawing looked good. He was always touched by this childish spontaneity of Kaylin. Distracted from the topic of painting, the main character asked how the girl was feeling. Kaylin replied that she was fine now, because Shelley was very helpful at that time, stopping the bleeding. But the doctor still doesn't want to let her go. The young man noticed other drawings on the bedside table. He was in all these drawings. The young man became embarrassed and upset at the same time. He was once again worried about Kaylin's state of mind. There was clearly something wrong with the girl. Night fell. The city gradually sank into a state of peace and hope that tomorrow everything would change for the better. Francis walked up to Daniel's office and timidly knocked on the door. The captain was already waiting for him. He motioned for his comrade to pass. He couldn't wait to tell me something. Daniel said that he found information that interested him for Francis. We were talking about a gang, and this gang is here. The main character asked if he could just watch it right away. It shouldn't be that expensive.